Shantatma Prabhu distributed one Mahabig book. Revatinandan Prabhu distributed one Mahabig book. So he's going to catch up. He was the winner last 3 years, so he just started yesterday. Hamsavini Mataji distributed one Mahabig book and 4 magazines. Rupa Raghunath Prabhu distributed one Mahabig book, one medium book and one small book. Nitai Charan Prabhu distributed one Mahabig book, 17 small books. Lochanananda distributed 2 Mahabig books, 5 big books. We were here, someone came yesterday. Janananda Goswami Maharaj distributed 4 Mahabig books, 4 medium books, 1 small book, 1 magazine. Pratibha from Yoga Lyric distributed 6 Mahabig books, 1 medium book, 1 small book, 1 magazine. Nitai Gaur Sundar Prabhu distributed 6 Mahabig books, 13 small books. Manjuvali distributed 5 Mahabig books, 13 medium books. Jiva Prana Prabhu in Paris distributed 9 Mahabig books, 2 medium books, 5 small books. Antashya from Yoga Lyrics distributed 13 Mahabig books, 3 medium books. Devaprastha Prabhu distributed 16 Mahabig books. Fatima distributed 14 Mahabig books and 1 Arabic Bhagavad Gita. Ivan distributed 16 Mahabig books, 2 Arabic books. Arishtanasana Prabhu distributed 22 Mahabig books, 4 small books, 4 magazines. Dayal Nitai Prabhu distributed 21 Mahabig books, 3 medium books, 1 Arabic book. Panchatattva Prabhu distributed 20 Mahabig books, 20 medium books. Ramalila Mataji distributed 29 Mahabig books, 8 medium books. On the top list is Bhakta Jao distributed 40 Mahabig books.
Haribo! My gosh.
I cannot find the total anywhere. Total, yes, I found the total. From yesterday, the total are, they distributed all the devotees together 228 Mahabig books, 228 Mahabig books, 5 big books, 55 medium books, 42 small books, 9 magazines, 1 Arabic Bhagavad Gita, 4 Arabic small, with the total book points of 517.90.
Oh, that's a lot of books.
Srila Prabhupada Book Marathon ki
Jai!
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namah Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate
So we continue. Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita by Srila Satsarup Das Goswami. I guess that's around here. Yeah. So, Don. Bhakta Don. Don was a test of Swamiji's tolerance. He had lived in a storefront for months, working little and not trying to change his habits. He had a remarkable speech affection. Instead of talking, he enunciated his words as if he were reciting them from a book. And he never used contractions. Contractions means like he wasn't, he was not, no? Contraction, instead of saying he was not, he was... Contractions, no? Wasn't is a contraction, no? It wasn't that he was intellectual, just that somehow he had developed a plan to abolish his natural dialect. Don's speech struck people as bizarre, like it might be the result of too many drugs. Lucky. It gave him the air of being not an ordinary being. And he continuously took marijuana even after Swamiji had asked those who lived with him not to. Sometimes during the day, his girlfriend would join him in the storefront and they would sit together talking intimately and sometimes kissing. Wow. But he liked the Swami. And he even gave some money once. He liked living in the storefront, and Swamiji didn't complain. But others did. One day, an interested newcomer dropped by the storefront and found Don alone, surrounded by the sharp aroma of marijuana. "You've been smoking pot, but the Swami doesn't want anyone smoking here." Don denied it. "I've not been smoking." "You're not speaking the truth." The boy then reached in Don's shirt pocket and pulled out a joint. And Don hit him in the face. Several of the boys found out. They weren't sure what was right. What would the Swami do? What do you do if someone smoked pot? Even though a devotee was not supposed to, could it be allowed sometimes? They put the matter before Swamiji. Prabhupada took it very seriously, and he was upset, especially about the violence. He hit you? He asked the boy. I will go down myself and kick him in the head. But then Prabhupada thought about it and said that Don should be asked to leave. But Don had already left. The next morning, during Swamiji's class, Don appeared at the front door. From his desk, Swamiji looked out at Don with great concern. But his first concern was for ISKCON. Ask him, Prabhupada requested Roy, who sat nearby. If he has marijuana, then he cannot come in. Our society. Prabhupada was like an anxious father, afraid for the life of his infant ISKCON. Roy went to the door and told Don he would have to give up his drugs if he entered, and Don walked away. Raphael was not interested in spiritual discipline. He was a tall young man with long, straight, brown hair who, like Don, tried to stay aloof and casual towards Swamiji. When Prabhupada introduced japa and encouraged the boys to chant during the day, Raphael didn't go for it. He said he liked a good kirtan, but he would not chant on beads. One time Swamiji was locked out of his apartment and the boys had to break the lock. Swamiji asked Raphael to replace it. Days went by. Raphael could sit in the storefront reading Rambo. Rambo is a French author. He could wander around town, but he couldn't find time to fix the lock. One evening, he dropped by the Swami's apartment, opened the lockless door, and made his way to the back room, where some boys were sitting, listening to Swamiji speak informally about Krishna consciousness. Suddenly, Raphael spoke up, expressing his doubts and revealing his distracted mind. As for me, he said, I don't know what's happening. I don't know whether a brass band is playing or what the heck is going on. Some of the devotees tensed. He had interrupted their devotional mood. Raphael is very candid, Swamiji replied, smiling as if to explain his son's behavior to the others. Raphael finally fixed the lock, but one day after a lecture, he approached the Swami, stood beside the dais and spoke up, exasperated, impatient. I'm not meant to sit in a temple and chant on beads. My father was a boxer. I am meant to run on the beach and breathe in the big breaths of air. Raphael went on gesticulating and voicing his familiar complaints, things he would rather do than take up Krishna consciousness. Suddenly, Prabhupada interrupted him in a loud voice. Then do it, do it. Raphael shrank away, but he stayed. All cases, huh? Somebody wants to make a comment or question, don't hesitate, please. Bill Epstein. Bill Epstein took pride in his relationship with the Swami. It was honest. Although he helped the Swami by telling people about him and sending them up to see him in his apartment, he felt the Swami knew he'd never become a serious follower. Nor did Bill ever mislead himself into thinking he would ever be serious. But Prabhupada wasn't content with Bill take it or leave it attitude. When Bill would finally show up at the storefront again after spending some days at a friend's place, only to fall asleep with a blanket wrapped over his head during the lecture, Prabhupada would just start shouting so loud that Bill couldn't sleep. You can hear this sometime, actually in 1966 lectures, Prabhupada is almost shouting in his classes. but you feel out of enthusiasm actually. Prabhupada would just start shouting. Okay. Sometimes Bill would ask a challenging question and Prabhupada would answer and then say, "Are you satisfied?" And Bill would look up dreamily and answer, "No." Then, then Prabhupada would answer it again more fully and say louder, "Are you satisfied?" And again, Bill would say no. Etiquette, huh? This would go on until Bill would have to give in. Yes, I'm satisfied. But Bill was the first person to get up and dance during a kirtan in the storefront. Some of the other boys thought he looked like he was dancing in an egotistical, narcissistic way, even though his arms were outstretched in a facsimile of the pictures of Lord Chaitanya. But when Swamiji saw Bill dancing like that, he looked at Bill with wide open eyes and feelingly expressed appreciation. Bill is dancing just like Lord Chaitanya. So you could say, Prabhupada saw the good. I heard yesterday some memories from Revatinandan Swami, because I think he left his body yesterday or the day before yesterday, something. Yeah, I saw on Dandavat. And he was in one of his memory. He was a very pioneer. He was the brother of Vishnu Jan. He says in the memory, he was the brother of Vishnu Jan. Revatin.
They came together. I never knew that.
Yeah, he said this in a video yesterday, that he was his brother. And he was actually telling how Prabhupada showed them how to dance. And he said very, very gracefully, Prabhupada would dance. And then one point he said he was very new himself, and he said Prabhupada would started to jump up and down, and he said he would have his arm stretched like this, and he would not move his body. He was just really like dance up and down. It reminded me of Jananda Maharaj when he does also the same thing. And he said that he was himself, Revatinandan Swami, he was a young boy of 22 or 21. And he said he also jumped, but after some time he was exhausted, he stopped, and Prabhupada kept on jumping up and down for a long time. And I think, this is the dance Prabhupada told the devotees. He also says in the same video that Prabhupada didn't like when devotees would sing the Maha Mantra with long, I would say, like Rari Rama. He said they have to fill up with the name. He said. So it make me thoughtful about some kirtan melas, and we go on like for hours.
On numerous occasions, Prabhupada said he didn't like it at all.
Yeah.
It was not in line with what he taught and what his guru taught. It's something they pick up from movies or something, Bollywood movies or something. So Prabhupada didn't like it. He said that you should show off your musical ability.
I heard also in the book about Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. I remember I read also this happened in the temple during Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati time, that he was and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur sent a disciple and said, "Stop him howling." What's that? Howling, like howling. Stop him, like.
Bhaktisiddhanta also said, he came, in that same book I read, he came to visit one of his temples, and he heard this kirtan going on in the temple room. And the fellow was like, and Bhaktisiddhanta said, he will take 5 minutes to chant one mantra. And he said, who's that? And they said, oh, it's a new man. Prabhu said, and Bhakti Siddhanta said, tell him we don't do that yet. And send them to stop it. So it was not something that was approved from Bhakti Siddhanta's time. But somehow people have found out, have picked it up and are doing it now. And said, he just like said, the way he's going, it would take 5 minutes to chant one mantra. He just exaggerated, but that's what that is prolonged. And it's difficult for others to follow anyway. No one can, if you do that, a crowd cannot repeat that.
Crowd cannot. They are lost, especially newcomers.
All comers.
Yeah. Yes, Prabhuji?
Actually, Padri Narayan Maharaj, he shared that 2 times Prabhupada stopped the Mangalarti because they were singing this Hare Krishna.
Oh.
This particular
Okay.
he stopped, he said this is Muslim.
Oh, really?
He told the devotees at the manor and they started singing it. But, we don't want to make politics out of it. It's
Yeah, we don't want to make politics, but that's why it's good to read.
I heard it in Krishna Bharan Temple.
Yeah, that's why it's good to read Prabhupada Lilamrita also, because it's, you don't read these things in the Chaitanya Charitamrita or Bhagavatam, and you read it in Prabhupada Lilamrita or in Prabhupada's memories, and even for dancing, like also I think Prabhupada also stopped sometimes some wild dancing, I think also, no?
Yeah.
He wanted it to be gracious for the pleasure of the deities. Anyway, so he appreciated this Bill dancing just like Lord Chaitanya. Bill sometimes returned from his wanderings with money, and although it was not very much, he would give it to the Swami. He liked to sleep at the storefront and spend the day on the street, returning for lunch, or kirtans, or a place to sleep. He used to leave in the morning and go looking for cigarettes on the ground. But to Bill, the Swami was part of the hip movement and had thus earned a place of respect in his eyes as a genuine person. Bill objected when the boys introduced signs of reverential worship toward the Swami, starting with their giving him an elevated seat in the temple. And as the boys who lived with the Swami gradually began to show enthusiasm, competition, and even rivalry among themselves, Bill turned from it in disgust. He allowed that he would go on just helping the Swami in his own way, and he knew that the Swami appreciated whatever he did, so he wanted to leave it at that. Karl Jürgens had helped Prabhupada in times of need. He had helped with the legal work of incorporating ISKCON, signed the ISKCON charter as a trustee, and even opened his home to Swamiji when David had driven him from the Bowery loft. But those days when he and Eva had shared their apartments with him had created a tension that had never left. He liked the Swami, he respected him as a genuine sannyasi from India, but he didn't accept the conclusions of the philosophy. The talk about Krishna and the soul was fine, but the idea of giving up drugs and sex was carrying it a little too far. Now Prabhupada was settled in his new place, and Karl decided that he had done his part to help and was no longer needed. Although he had helped Prabhupada incorporate his International Society for Krishna Consciousness, he didn't want to join it. Karl found the Second Avenue Kirtan too public, not like the more intimate atmosphere he had enjoyed with the Swami on the Bowery. Now the audience were larger, and there was an element of wild letting loose, that they had never had on the Bowery. Like some of the other old associates, Carl felt sheepish and reluctant to join in. In comparison to the 2nd Avenue Street scene, the old meetings in the 4th floor Bowery loft had seemed more mystical, like secluded meditations. Carol Baker also preferred a more sedate kirtan. She thought people were trying to take out their personal frustrations by the wild singing and dancing. The few times she did attend evening kirtans on 2nd Avenue were tense moments. One time a group of teenagers had come into the storefront, mocking and shouting, "Hey, what the hell is this?" She kept thinking that at any moment a rock was going to come crashing through the big window. And anyway, her boyfriend wasn't interested. James Green felt embarrassed. He saw that most of the new men were making a serious commitment to the Swami, whereas he could not. He had no bad feeling toward the Swami and his new movement, but he preferred to live alone. Robert Nelson, Prabhupada's old uptown friend, never deviated in his good feelings for Prabhupada, but he always went along in his own natural way and never adopted any serious disciplines. Somehow, almost all of those who had helped Prabhupada uptown and on the Bowery did not want to go further once he began a spiritual organization, which happened almost immediately after he moved into 26 2nd Avenue. New people were coming forward to assist him, and Carl, James, Carol, and others like them felt that they were being replaced and that their obligation toward the Swami was ending. It was a kind of changing of the guard. Although the members of the old guard were still his well-wishers, they began to drift away. Bruce Scharf had just graduated from New York University and was applying for a job. I think this must be Brahmananda, no? One day, an ex-roommate told him about the Swami he had visited on 2nd Avenue. They sing there, his friend said, and they have these far-out things where they have some dancing. And Allen Ginsberg was there. The Swami was difficult to understand, his friend explained, and besides that, his followers recorded his talks on a tape recorder. Why should he have a big tape recorder? That's not very spiritual. But Bruce became interested. Everybody had his own idea of spiritual life. Quite sentimental, actually. He was already a devotee of Indian culture. 4 years ago, when he was barely 20, Bruce had worked during the summer as a steward aboard an American freighter and gone to India, where he had visited temples, brought pictures of Shiva and Ganesh and books on Gandhi, and felt as if he were part of the culture. I think I heard even that either him or what was the other devotee, the first one who stopped Prabhupada. Yeah, and another one who stopped Prabhupada in the street, and I agree. I think that they actually went to India.
They went to India, all three of them.
Same boat, the Jaraduta. I heard this. Yeah. Yeah, they went to India actually. Yeah? Not Ayagriva. Ayagriva wanted to go, and he met Prabhupada in the street, I think, and he said, I was thinking to go to India to look for a guru or something. When he returned to NYU, he read more about India and wrote a paper on Gandhi for his history course. He would eat in Indian restaurants and attend Indian films and music recitals. Thank you. And he was reading the Bhagavad Gita. He had even given up eating meat. He had plans of returning to India, taking some advanced college courses, and then coming back to America to teach Eastern religions. But in the meantime, he was experimenting with LSD. Chet Barnett was 18 years old. His divorced mother had recently moved to Greenwich Village, where she was studying psychology at NYU.
That's Chuck.
Chuck. Chuck.
That's a Chitananda.
Oh,
He's young, 18 years old.
18 years old. Chuck had moved out of his mother's apartment to one of the 12th Street on the Lower East Side in the neighborhood of Allen Ginsberg and other hip poets and musicians. He was a progressive jazz flutist who worked with several professional groups in the city. Oh, that's him we see in the movie with this hair like this playing a flute? Okay. He had been practicing Hatha Yoga for 6 years. He started young, 12 years old, and had recently been experimenting with LSD. He would have visions of lotuses and concentric circles, but after coming down, he would become more involved than ever in sensuality. A close friend of Chuck's had suddenly gone homosexual that summer, leaving Chuck disgusted and cynical. Someone told Chuck that an Indian Swami was staying downtown on 2nd Avenue. And so he came one day in August to the window of the former Matchless gift store. It's funny, when you read this, it's like all the puzzle pieces coming together, you know? Krishna sending all these different people to help Prabhupada start the movement, huh? Steve Garino, the son of a New York fireman, had grown up in city and graduated from Brooklyn College in 1961. Influenced by his father, he had gone into the Navy, where he had tolerated 2 years of military routine, always waiting for the day he would be free to join his friends on the Lower East Side. Finally, a few months after the death of President Kennedy, he had been honorably discharged. Without so much as paying a visit to his parents, he had headed straight for the Lower East Side, which by then appeared vividly within his mind to be the most mystical place in the world. He was writing stories and short novels under the literary influence of Franz Kafka and others. And he began to take LSD, to search and experiment with consciousness, a love supreme, a record by John Coltrane, the jazz musician, encouraged Steve to think that God actually existed. Just to make enough money to live, Steve had taken a job with the welfare office. One afternoon, during his lunch hour, while walking down 2nd Avenue, he saw that the Matchless gift store had a small piece of paper in the window announcing lectures in Bhagavad Gita, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. Chuck. I finally found 2nd Avenue and 1st Street, and I saw through the window that there was some chanting going on inside, and some people were sitting up against the wall. Beside me on the sidewalk, some middle-class people were looking in and jiggling. I turned to them, and with my palms folded, I asked, "Is this where a Swami is?" They jiggled and said, "Pilgrim, your search has ended." That was a prophetic word. I wasn't surprised by this answer because I felt it was the truth. Bruce and Chuck, unknown to one another, lived only 2 blocks apart. After the suggestion from his friend, Bruce also made his way to the storefront. Bruce: I was looking for Hare Krishna. I had left my apartment and had walked over to Avenue B. When I decided to walk all the way down to Houston Street, when I came to 1st Street, I turned right and then, walking along 1st Street, came to 2nd Avenue. All along 1st Street, I was seeing these Puerto Rican grocery stores, and then there was one of those churches where everyone was standing up, singing loudly and playing tambourines. It's kind of kirtan, actually, they do. This, how do you call them? This, when they're dancing in the church, this, there is a word for this. All this dancing in the churches. How they call it? Gospel. Then as I walked further along First Street, I had the feeling that I was leaving the world, like when you're going to the airport to catch a plane. I thought, now I'm leaving a part of me behind, and I'm going to something new. But when I got over to 2nd Avenue, I couldn't find Hare Krishna. There was a gas station, and then I walked past a little storefront, but the only sign was one that said matchless gifts. Then I walked back again, past the store, and in the window, I saw a black and white sign announcing a Bhagavad Gita lecture. I entered the storefront and saw a pile of shoes there. So I took off my shoes and came in and sat down near the back. Steve, I had a feeling, Steve, the Sadhguru Maharaj, I had a feeling that this was a group that was already established and had been meeting for a while. I came in and sat down on the floor, and the boy, who said his name was Roy, was very courteous and friendly to me. He seemed to be one who had already experienced the meetings. He asked me my name, and I felt at ease. Suddenly the Swami entered, coming through the side door. He was wearing a saffron dhoti, but no shirt, just a piece of cloth like a long sash, tied in a knot across his right shoulder and leaving his arms, his left shoulder and part of his chest bare. When I saw him, I thought of the Buddha. Bruce. There were about 15 people sitting on the floor. One man with a big beard sat up by the front of the right-hand side, leaning up against the wall. After some time, the door on the opposite side opened, and in walked the Swami. When he came in, he turned his head to see who was in his audience, and then he stared right at me. Our eyes met. It was as if he were studying me. In my mind, it was like a photograph was being taken of Swamiji looking at me for the first time. There was a pause. Then he very gracefully got up on the dais and sat down and took out a pair of hand cymbals and began a kirtan. The kirtan was the thing that most affected me. It was the best music I'd ever heard. And it had meaning. You could actually concentrate on it. And it gave you some joy to repeat the words, Hare Krishna. I immediately accepted it as a spiritual practice. Chuck. I entered the storefront, and sitting on a grass mat on the hard floor was a person who seemed at first to be neither male nor female, but when he looked at me, I couldn't even look him straight in the eyes. They were so brilliant and glistening. His skin was golden with rosy cheeks, and he had large ears that framed his face. He had 3 strands of beads, on which was one which was at his neck, one a little longer, and the other down his chest. He had a long forehead with rows above his shining eyes, and there were many furrows in his brow. His arms were slender and long. His mouth was rich and full, and very dark and red and smiling, and his teeth were brighter than his eyes. He sat in a cross-legged position that I had never seen before in any yoga book, and had never seen any yogi perform. It was a sitting posture, but his right foot was crossed over the thigh and brought back beside his left hip, and one knee rested on the other directly in front of him. His every expression and gesture was different from those of any other personality I had ever seen, and I sensed that they had meanings that I did not know, from a culture and a mood that were completely beyond this world. There was a mole on his side and a peculiar callus on his ankle, a round callus similar to what a karate expert develops on his knuckle. He was dressed in an unhemmed cloth dyed saffron. Everything about him was exotic, and his whole effulgence made him seem to be not even sitting in the room, but projected from some other place. He was so brilliant in color that it was like a Technicolor movie, and yet he was right there. I heard him speaking. He was sitting right there before me, yet it seemed that if I reached out to touch him, he wouldn't be there. At the same time, seeing him was not an abstract or subtle experience, but a most intense presence. After their first visit to the storefront, Chuck, Steve, and Bruce each got an opportunity to see the Swami upstairs in his apartment. Steve: I was on my lunch hour and had to be back in the office very soon. I was dressed in a summer business suit. I had planned it so that I had just enough time to go to the storefront and buy some books, then go to lunch and return to work. At the storefront, one of the Swami's followers said that I could go up and see the Swami. I went upstairs to his apartment and found him at his sitting place with a few boys. I must have interrupted what he was saying, but I asked him if I could purchase the 3 volumes of the Srimad Bhagavatam. One of the devotees produced the books from the closet opposite Prabhupada's seat. I handled the books. They were a very special color not usually seen in America, a reddish natural earth like a brick. And I asked him how much they cost. $6 each, he said. That was a lot of money that these days, no? I took $20 out of my wallet and gave it to him. He seemed the only one to ask about the price of the books or give the money to, because none of the others came forward to represent him. They were just sitting back and listening to him speak. These books are commentaries on the scriptures? I asked, trying to show that I knew something about books. Swamiji said yes, they were his commentaries. Sitting, smiling at ease, Swamiji was very attractive. He seemed very strong and healthy. When he smiled, all his teeth were beautiful, and his nostrils flared aristocratically. His face was full and powerful. He was wearing an Indian cloth robe, and as he sat cross-legged, his smooth skin legs were partly exposed. He wore no shirt, but the upper part of his body was wrapped with an Indian cloth shawl. His limbs were quite slender, but he had a protruding belly. When I saw that Swamiji was having to personally handle the sale of books, I did not want to bother him. I quickly asked him to please keep the change from my $20. I took the 3 volumes without any bag or wrapping and was standing, preparing to leave, when Swamiji said, "Sit down," and gestured that I should sit opposite him like the others. He had said, "Sit down," in a different tone of voice. It was a heavy tone and indicated that now the sale of the books was completed and I should sit with the others and listen to him speak. He was offering me an important invitation to become like one of the others, who I knew spent many hours with him during the day when I was usually at my job and not able to come. I envied their leisure and in being able to learn so much from him and sit and talk intimately with him. By ending the sale transaction and asking me to sit, he assumed that I was in need of listening to him and that I had nothing better in the world to do than to stop everything else and hear him. But I was expected back at the office. I didn't want to argue, but I couldn't possibly stay. "I'm sorry, I have to go," I said definitely. "I'm only on my lunch hour." As I said this, I had already started to move for the door, and Swamiji responded by suddenly breaking into a wide smile and looking very charming and very happy. He seemed to appreciate that I was a working man, a young man on the go. I had not come by simply because I was unemployed and had nowhere to go and nothing to do. Approving of my energetic demeanor, he allowed me to take my leave. Chuck, One of the devotees in the storefront invited me upstairs to see the Swami in private. I was led out of the storefront into a hallway and suddenly into a beautiful little garden with a picnic table, a birth bath, a birdhouse, and flower beds. After we passed through the garden, we came to a middle-class apartment building. We walked up the stairs and entered an apartment which was absolutely bare of any furniture, just white walls and a parquet floor. He led me through the front room and into another room, and there was the Swami sitting in that same majestic spiritual presence on a thin cotton mat which was covered by a cloth with little elephants printed on it, and leaning back on a pillow which stood against the wall. One night, Bruce walked home with Wally, and he told Wally about his interest in going to India and becoming a professor of Oriental literature. Wally is Umapati, no? I think. Umapati. Why go to India? Wally asked. India has come here. Swamiji is teaching us these authentic things. Why go to India? Bruce thought Wally made sense, so he resolved to give up his long-cherished idea of going to India, at least as long as he could go on visiting the Swami. Bruce. I decided to go and speak personally to Swamiji, so I went to the storefront. I found out that he lived in an apartment in a rear building. A boy told me the number and said, I could just go and speak with the Swami. He said, yes, just go. So I walked through the storefront, and there was a little courtyard where some plants were growing. Usually in New York, there is no courtyard, nothing green, but this was very attractive. And in that courtyard, there was a boy typing at a picnic table, and he looked very spiritual and dedicated. I hurried upstairs and rang the bell from apartment number 2C. After a little while, the door opened, and it was the Swami. Yes, he said, and I said, I would like to speak with you. He opened the door wider and stepped back and said, yes, come. We went inside together into his sitting room and sat down facing each other. He sat behind his metal trunk desk on a very thin mat, which was covered with a wooden blanket-like cover that had frazzled ends and elephants decorating it. He asked me my name, and I told him I was Bruce. And then he remarked, in India, during the British period, there was one Lord Bruce. And he said something about Lord Bruce being a general and engaging in some campaigns. I felt that I had to talk to the Swami, to tell him my story, and actually, I found him interested to listen. It was very intimate sitting with him in his apartment, and he was actually wanting to hear about me. While we were talking, he looked up past me, high up on the wall behind me, and he was talking about Lord Chaitanya. The way he looked up, he was obviously looking at some pictures or something, but with an expression of deep love in his eyes. I turned around to see what made him look like that. Then I saw the picture in the brown frame, Lord Chaitanya dancing in Kirtan. On arrête normalement à 9h moins le quart, c'est ça?
Bruce is Brahmananda.
Hmm?
Bruce is Brahmananda.
Yeah. Ouais. Supposed to stop now, no? Or
Breakfast is there.
sorry?
Breakfast is there.
Okay.
Okay.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita ki jai, Haribol. Namo Vishnu Praya Krishna Praya Shrimate Lokanath Sumiti. Hare Krishna.
big. Just to go from one side to the other. You need to go to the temple, it took me an hour. So, and somebody says, oh, he's in Brooklyn. Okay, yeah, but which part of Brooklyn? It's so big, you know? It's still there, we got it. Yeah, long time after. We, recent.
He's still there now.
Yeah. And then they have programs there.
It's named after Australia.
Yes. It was fitting because what Prabhupada was giving was matchless. Put a price on it.
It became a
And the neighborhood,
pilgrimage.
yeah, and the neighborhood has changed. It was a bad neighborhood, but now it's considered trendy, hip. And lots of stores and shops. It just changed. Over a year, it's nice. Now it's, to get up to live there now.
You left an hour after, or 45 minutes after.
When Prabhupada was there, it wasn't.
We got here at around 8:30.
Pretty much an hour.
He didn't stay too much longer.
He was in Lower East Side of Manhattan. That's where it's been 6 seconds. It's in Manhattan, but it's in the Lower East Side.
Really, really nice.
There's West Side, East Side, and then there's Uptown, Downtown, and Lower.
This big,
Oh yeah?
we see sometimes a picture of with so many people. They were on top of the
The roof, that's Manhattan.
Some picture.
Yeah.
It was this one, Brooklyn,
No, that was in Manhattan.
another one.
Tape is a really
Yeah, we
nice.
don't have it anymore. While Prabhupada was here, they purchased.
Taking forever because of all
You know, Prabhupada called it the skyscraper, you know. It was 11 stories.
Yeah.
That was prestigious, you know. To have, and that was right in Manhattan, surrounded by other taller buildings. And Prabhupada, he liked it because that was a big, that was a sign of progress. And they came to Manhattan,
Usually
the
Sundays,
Lower East Side was storefront.
we rotated.
And then after a few years, they have a 11-story building.
Last weekend.
Yeah.
4 times.
They got that building in, the Lilamrita building in like 74. They were in Brooklyn when I joined. In 72, they were in Brooklyn. And then I stayed 2 years in the Brooklyn temple. And then, but the winters were too much for me because I'd come from Western Islands. And I found it difficult.
From Trinidad.
Yeah.
It must be later.
Yeah. This building is like an icebox. Cool. And so I lived 2 years outside before joining the temple. And then 2 years in the temple. So I experienced and survived 4 winters. And as a devotee, it was difficult because there had no heat in the building.